happy 9th day of Christmas. I bet the Christmas spirit has waned for many of us. Christmas lasts for 12 days in the church calendar, but our culture tends to start celebrating Christmas the day after Halloween. Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's have become known as the holiday season. And hey, it's January 2nd today, so it's all over now, right? Well, no, not here in church. We're still celebrating Christmas. Jesus coming to us as a child, God becoming human, Emmanuel, the incarnation. I'm sure that if you did not see it live, by now most of you have at least heard about what has become known as the Great Baby Jesus Switcheroo on Christmas Eve here at Old Donation's annual Christmas Eve pageant. If you weren't here and didn't see it, you can check it out on YouTube. For the first time since I've been here, and perhaps for the first time in decades, we had a live baby Jesus. But the doll that we normally use for the Christmas pageant was hidden underneath the altar just in case something went wrong with the live baby. And indeed, there was a little bit of a problem with Liam, our real infant. So Mary, played by Brett Dudley, grabbed the doll from under the altar when the live baby Jesus' mother reclaimed him from his spot in the manger, and Mary plopped the doll baby Jesus into the manger with a charming smile. Bob later joked in his Christmas Eve sermon that the real baby Jesus was not like the one that we sing about in Away in a Manger with no crying he makes. We were singing Away in a Manger when the great baby Jesus switcheroo took place. And Liam was squirming and making just a little bit of noise. And the real baby Jesus was like little Liam, because the real baby Jesus was a real baby. We talk about Jesus living without sin, but an infant crying is not a sin, is it? We struggle with what God becoming human means. It means that God really was a human. The real baby Jesus was not born able to articulate a theology of salvation. This was something he learned as he grew up. We heard in today's gospel that after returning to Nazareth with his parents, Jesus increased in wisdom and in years. In other words, he grew up and learned things along the way. He was not born knowing everything. The real baby Jesus was a real baby. He cried when he was hungry or cold or sick. Presumably, he got diaper rash, and in his day, they did not have Desitin. Being without sin does not mean that Jesus was not real, with all of the messy, fleshy humanity that being human entails. If we think of Jesus as a purely spiritual being, we're actually committing an ancient heresy known as Docetism. But that's okay, you're still welcome at church, even if you're a heretic. Jesus was a real human and developed the way real humans do. He was taught by his human parents, Mary and Joseph. Today we heard the only story in the New Testament that we have about Jesus as an adolescent. And like all adolescents, Jesus was difficult. How hard would it have been for him to tell his parents that he was going to go hang out in the synagogue for a while? He probably just lost track of time as a normal adolescent might, and like a normal adolescent, didn't think about the frantic fear his absence would cause his parents. Jesus was at the normal, thoughtless stage for adolescence, and he was also without sin. He returned to Nazareth with his parents and was obedient to them. The obedient part is where we see his divinity, isn't it? He was a real adolescent, but clearly an extraordinary one. Jesus really was one of us, like that 1995 Joan Osborne song. God was one of us. God being one of us is known as the incarnation, which is always the focus of Christmastide in the church. We can still find God in our everyday lives today. God can be found in the most difficult families, including yours and mine. And God's wisdom can be revealed to us from the most unexpected places, like from the mouth of a 12-year-old who has just scared you nearly to death, or from the mouth of a younger child. We all have stories about amazing spiritual insights that we've heard from children. Or from a teenager. I preached a whole sermon last July about wisdom revealed to me from some of our own teenagers here at Old Donation. Or God's wisdom can be revealed to us from our most annoying neighbor. Christmas occurs near the winter solstice when we celebrate light in the darkness part of the year. And darkness can also help us to understand the incarnation. I have friends who aren't Christian who tell me that they think Jesus was pretty cool. They like a lot of what he has to say. They like what he has to say against money, how he sticks up for the poor, and they like his teaching about judgment. You know, the part where he tells us not to judge others. These friends wish the Christians that they knew wouldn't be so judgmental. I like his teaching, I've heard various non-Christian friends say. But why do you Christians have to emphasize all that suffering stuff, the crucifixion and all that? Why can't we just agree that he was a really good teacher and leave it there? They object to our theology of the cross. And I know Christians who also wish that we would emphasize the cross a little less. But Jesus on the cross helps us to understand the significance of the incarnation. Even more than picturing him in a manger crying or picturing him with diaper rash or bad breath. Jesus on the cross reminds us that Jesus suffered as we suffer. Jesus understands human suffering because he experienced it. God knows how we feel. We've had 2 deaths just this week here at Old Donation, and many other losses in the past month and year. We've had far too many of our members diagnosed with cancer lately. We've experienced a lot of darkness, a lot of sickness and suffering. Members of our church family are hurting deeply, and we hurt with them. And we worship a God who also hurts with us in all the dark times, because God knows about suffering. God came into the world as a helpless baby and experienced what we all experience as children. God understands what it's like to be an adolescent because God was an adolescent. Jesus knew what it was like to lose a friend and to weep. And Jesus knew what it was like to suffer and die from extraordinary pain. In times like these that we've been experiencing at Old Donation, when members of our church family are suffering, people are often wary of what to say to someone who is hurting or grieving. They don't want to say the wrong thing. But in general, there aren't a lot of right things to say. Saying I'm sorry is inadequate, but about the best we can do most of the time. Saying I know how you feel, on the other hand, is almost always the wrong thing to say, because we can never completely understand how another person feels. Only God truly understands how we feel because of the incarnation. The incarnation, which we celebrate at Christmas, reminds us that while we worship a being entirely different than us, entirely other, we also worship someone who understands how we feel, who has had feelings of dark despair, and yet was able to go on, to overcome, to actually defeat death, to celebrate light in the darkness. Merry Christmas to you and blessings on this new year.